Welcome to the New Money Habits podcast, where we talk about how to create a better plan for your money so you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. Here are your hosts, Sarah Jones and Nino Villa.
Welcome back, budgeteers. Coach Nino Villa here. Alongside me, it's my partner on the airways, as always, Sarah Jones. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing, and how are you holding up in southern Texas?
Oh, you know what? We're doing pretty well, and we're getting ready to travel. We'll be on the road in a couple of days, after this recording. So we absolutely love it here. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little sad to leave. You know, most locations we're like, okay, we're ready. You know, we've been here for like 3 weeks. We're ready to get on to the new one. But we love it here so much that this one's hard to leave. Hard to leave. So, but we'll be back in Arizona in a little over a week. So we do love it there too. So, you know, leaving one, place that we love to get to another place that we love.
So then the question becomes, like, do you see you got yourselves settling anywhere? Maybe not like anytime soon in the short term, but like long term. Can you see yourselves giving up the RV life and going back to like a rooted, we live in this one place year round?
The thought of that makes me a little nauseous. Nope.
Fair enough.
The thought of owning a home again and all the work that, like, RV life is a lot of work. So I don't want to, glamorize that part of it, because it is a lot of work and it's a lot of maintenance. It's a lot of upkeep, probably 10 times what you do on a home. I mean, it's a lot. But home is, I think, I just have the travel bug, Nino. I don't know. It just, the thought of just being in one place. Now, we have thought about, maybe if we purchase like places, like smaller homes in a couple of different locations, maybe we rent them out for, short-term, rentals or whatever. And then we kind of always have these little places to go, like some of our favorite places where we could hang out for a couple of weeks, or whatever. We have talked about that, but I am not ready for purchasing a home to like settle down, and I don't see that happening. I just don't see that happening anytime soon. Life can throw all kinds of crazy stuff your way, right? And so I never really know, but not right now. I think we'll keep rolling down the road for a while.
All right. Yep. Nauseous. That was the answer. Like, that ain't happening anytime soon. Love the idea of multiple places that become, streams of income that you get to vacation at when you want to, but are then open and making you money in the interim. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to do an episode about that one day, but that day is not today.
No.
We are going to talk about assets today, but we're actually going to talk about them in the other way. We're going to talk about selling assets to pay off debts, and we'll kind of get into maybe even a couple of client stories about when, how, why, all of that. But before we do that, don't miss out on valuable financial insights. Subscribe to the New Money Habits podcast today and unlock a wealth of knowledge to empower your financial journey. Stay up to date with the latest episodes as Sarah and I discuss practical tips, host expert guests, and have thought-provoking discussions on all things money-related. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community of savvy listeners. So today we want to talk about assets, but we want to talk about when, why, and how would you sell assets to pay off debts?
I think this is going to be a good episode because I'm just going to say that there are, in particular, one financial guru out there, right, that really kind of, I think, hits home the point of sell anything that you can just to get out of debt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And, maybe that's not right for everybody, right? Maybe it's not right for everybody, but how do you know when it is really right for you? How do you know maybe what assets that you could sell, right? There's so much involved in this, Nino, and I think it's worth having the conversation so people can ask themselves and go through this whole process, because it doesn't have to be an all or nothing deal, right? It doesn't have to be sell everything just to get out of debt, because we've talked about this before. Not all debt is bad, right? Like, we don't have to make people feel shameful or guilty for having debt. Like, that's not what this is about. So I don't believe that you need to sell everything, all of your assets, just to get out of debt. I don't think that that's appropriate for maybe even most people. I don't know, but you don't have to say, hey, I'm keeping all of this, right? Like, I'm keeping everything. I'm not getting rid of anything, and I'll just make some more money to pay the debt off. I think it doesn't have to be an all or nothing deal, right? There's so many options here, and I think it's good to talk about them.
Yeah, not only is it not all or nothing, it's what works for one person may not work for another. When we get into a particular client case that I want to share today, I think about the factors that really drove them to make that decision were very different than, say, even my own, because I have considered selling off assets the same way they did, but my situation was very different. And we'll highlight some of those differences to kind of show, like, sometimes it really is right for one person and not right for another.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think that that's important to highlight. And again, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, right? We personally, we did not sell any assets to get out of debt. Now, I mean, we might have sold an extra table that we had in the garage, or, something like that, smaller things, but we did not, when we were on our debt-free journey twice, we didn't sell assets to pay off our debt. And I have had clients that have sold a lot of their assets to pay off debt, right? And so it can go either way. It just depends on so many things that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So I want to maybe get the conversation started by sharing where I want to illustrate it's not all or nothing. When my wife and I decided that we were going to create our new money habits in 2012 and the beginning of 2013, one of the things that we were looking at is I had recently been laid off, but then rehired by my employer to work from home. So now I was working from home, and I did not have a 37-mile commute any longer. And she wasn't home alone with our 2-year-old at the time, right? Now I was going to be home. And so now we had 2 cars sitting in the garage. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to get out of some of our consumer debt, so credit cards and department cards and lines of credit and auto loans, I was looking at this second car we had purchased to ensure that she had a car while she was at home and I had a car to get to and from work. And I was like, we don't need this anymore. And so we sold an asset. We sold one of those cars to get out of the loan. And truth be told, when I sold the car off to like one of these places that buys cars and then resells them, I did have to write a check for $300. But the $300 got me out of $7,000 of debt. So I was almost more than happy to write that check, sell off the rest of it, and be out of that debt. And so that was one of the biggest assets. And if I had to really think about it, probably one of the only assets, other than having like garage sales and getting rid of stuff in the house, that we sold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting, and I will be honest, I think we had some assets that we could have sold, but we weren't willing to do it. We were not willing at the time. We really followed, like, we cleaned out the garage, we cleaned out all the storage, and we definitely had some garage sales and used that cash to put towards some extra payments, but we never sold any of our bigger assets because it wasn't something that we were willing to do. after, number one, running the numbers and just deciding like it didn't make sense for us because the assets that we had, we still owed money on. We didn't have anything for a long time, right? That was even paid off that we could have sold it, that it would have made a significant difference for us because we didn't have the money to go and pay cash for another car, right? And so we didn't want to sell one vehicle for a loan on something else. But what's so interesting, again, is that we kind of ran the numbers, right? And could there have been some different choices? Of course. But we really had to decide, was this a good idea to sell an asset, and this is something that I talk about my clients with, when is it a good idea to sell some of your assets to pay down your debt? And I think it obviously, it always just, there's several factors, right, that this decision depends on, but it's what's most important for you. I've had some clients that had kind of some, I'll use air quotes around toys, sitting around that had payments on them, but there was still equity. So, they could sell it for a profit, right, for more than what they owed on it. And some clients in particular, I remember we were kind of coming into fall and kind of the holiday time, right? And they had some four-wheelers and they had a camper, and they're like, you know what? We're probably not going to be using these during the winter months. We've got 6 months or so that we're really not going to be using these. And what's more important for us is that we get some of these payments off of our plate, right? And we just, and so they chose to sell those four-wheelers and they chose to sell the camper and get them paid off. And for them, that was the right time. They knew that they weren't going to be using them for a couple of months. You factor in insurance for them, just the winterization, the upkeep and everything. They're like, you know what? Maybe it's time for us to just get rid of them. And then we can buy them later on when we've got the money and it's going to feel so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. To that point, here we are all these years later, 10 years later, and we now have 2 cars again, right? So these decisions are usually for a season. It's so that you can pay off debt and you can go about acquiring these things in a different, more fiscally responsible way than maybe you did the first time around. You had said there, one of the first things to consider is what's important to you, right? And so it's the classic, because when we're talking about selling off assets to pay debts, it's the classic, it depends, right? Like, when is it right? And why would you do it? Well, it depends. And the first element of that is what's important to you. And so I know for my wife and I, it was really important that we get out of different monthly payments that we had and whatnot. So selling off that car got us out of that $7,000 loan. And so we didn't have to pay the $250 or $300 a month anymore. And it wasn't just about the monthly payment, because to your point, there is insurance, there is registration, there is maintenance. And so there are other costs associated with owning and operating that particular asset in our case that I also had to consider. And so it wasn't just getting out of the monthly payment and the loan itself, but alleviating some of those other costs associated with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think really what a lot of this comes down to too, when you're really going over what is important for you, it can be really hard to sell something that you enjoy, right? When I know for a lot of my clients, myself included, we don't necessarily want to get rid of the stuff that maybe helps us forget that we're having some financial troubles, right? Maybe we like to get out on the four-wheelers, those toys. Maybe we like to go to the lake, on the boat, and it helps us to spend time with friends, and it kind of just gets us away from our day-to-day and the frustrations of money. But it really is, Nino, I think, about looking at kind of the long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do I want long term and what really is important? And what can I do in the short term that I can still kind of get away from my day-to-day problems, right? What can I do to still hang out with my friends and still have fun, but also is supporting my long-term goals? And if having, I'm just going to say the boat to go with that same, if having that boat and that payment is causing too much stress, more stress than what peace it's giving me, right? And what fun it's giving me, then maybe it's time to say, hey, you know what? This needs to go down the road. I can borrow a friend's boat. Hey, a lot of my friends have boats. We can go out with them and hang out with them. I don't have to have my own right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, because to your point, this only has to be for a season, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
saying you get rid of it and you never get to get these things again forever, right? It's just for a period of time until you really get into a new season of life. And I think when you're looking at it, I just want to share too really quickly. I've had some clients that have sold some things, right? And it felt really great because they sold them and they paid down debt. And guess what? They didn't have the habits built yet to support that. And it caused a lot of frustration. They used it as kind of a, I don't want to say get rich quick, but solve all my problems right away kind of a deal, right? And so when you're selling assets to pay off some debt, you really also have to be working on your habits and your behaviors with money. So you know that you are making choices that are going to last you a lifetime, not just the meantime.
Yeah. Yeah. To that point about knowing the long-term plan, I remember this was quite some time ago now, but I was working with a young couple. And they had been recently married, maybe like 2-3 years, I guess. And they had purchased a home, but they purchased a home that was just a little out of their price range. I mean, it's that classic, we're in our mid-20s, maybe our late 20s, but we bought a house that's nicer than the house our parents live in. Like, you're not ready to do that, right? So they bought a little bit more house than they could afford, and it was an older home that needed attention. So, barely able to kind of make the monthly payment, and now you're like, yeah, but this needs to be renovated and this needs to be updated. And so as we talked more and more about their financial situation, but also the habits that they wanted to build up for managing money well, the idea was just kind of tossed out. Like, you guys are at least like, yes, you bought too much home for right now, but you guys are also benefiting from the market going up and that sort of thing. And so you're actually in a position where if you sold, there's enough to kind of hit the reset button. You'd be able to pay off all of the debt that you have because there were student loans and auto loans. And it's like, and you could just start with an absolute clean slate. But caution, right? Caution. Like, if you're going to hit the reset button, at least know, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to do that differently so that you don't end up back in the same spot? And over time, they eventually pulled the trigger and they said, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to sell the house. And they sold the house. They paid off all the debt. They had a little bit of cash reserves left. And then the next thing was, we are going to rent for a year or two. And in that year or two, we are going to save a 20% down payment. We're going to be more mindful this time when buying a home, where it's going to be located, the age of it, the work that needs to be done, these types of things. And it was just a fantastic transformation, because in that year that they're saving up to buy a home, they have their first child. And so life just started looking differently, and they felt differently because they knew, hey, we're debt free. Yes, we're paying rent right now, which stunk, but it's giving us the flexibility to not be locked into a particular neighborhood. We can do a little bit more research and all that stuff. And so it was just an incredible reset button, but not without a lot of consideration for how to do things differently the second time around.
Yeah, and really, I think this is so great because you're going into it the second time with more experience, right? And it's like, you can't really turn the clock backwards, but you can use that 2020 hindsight and say, I wish we would have done X, Y, and Z. You can use that information now going forward, right? And that's the benefit of kind of the reset, right? You can't take the first decision away, but you can reset it. So going forward, it can look completely different. And when you don't have a good plan in place, Nino, and you don't have the habits to support that, this is where I see it all the time. I'm sure you do as well. People refinance their home and pull equity out, right, to pay off their debt. But guess what happens? They get themselves right back into credit card debt because they haven't built the habits around. Now, that's not selling an asset, kind of, though, because you're pulling equity out of your home, right? And so that's kind of like selling part of an asset, right, of your home to pay this debt off. And if you don't have the habits and the discipline built, and you don't know what your long-term plan is, you're not doing yourselves any favor. And so if you are selling an asset, selling a vehicle, selling some toys, right, selling that boat or that camper to pay off debt, but you don't have your plan and you don't have the discipline, I'm going to say, unfortunately, it probably isn't going to work out the way that you think it's going to work out. You're going to find yourself frustrated because you no longer have that item, you no longer have that asset, and you're back in debt again.
Yeah.
I see it over and over.
Right. That it's only a fix for a very short period of time without the habits, right? If you can sell something off, you can pay off all the debt, but if you haven't done anything to address your consumer driven behaviors that led you into debt in the first place. It goes back to something we said on a recent episode about using credit cards, right? You don't use the credit card unless you have the cash to pay for that purchase. We're not saying you can't use a credit card. We're just saying don't use it unless you have the cash. And so if you haven't built up even that simple habit, then you can sell off all these things, some of which might bring you enjoyment, to get rid of the debt, feel like, wow, that's awesome, big win, congratulations. And if you don't have that new habit, find yourself 6, 12, 18 months later in a similar position, pulling your hair out, like, what did I do and how did I get here?
Yeah. And that's never good feeling, right? I mean, it's never good feeling. I just want to point out too, I think sometimes when we're talking about when is it a good time, to sell an asset to pay down debt, sometimes I will suggest things when clients have limited cash flow, which means their expenses are almost equal to their income, or, maybe they're living outside their means a little bit because I have some clients in particular that their debt payments are 61% of their income.
Oof.
61% of their income are their debt payments. Guys, that's tough. That is tough. And so, yes, I am suggesting, or, throwing the option out there, like, are there some assets that you have that we can sell? Because the cash flow isn't there, right? If we can sell an asset to pay off one of their debts that has a higher balance, so maybe there's a monthly payment that's $400, $500, $600. If we've got an asset that we can sell to take care of that, then we've just changed, right, their cash flow by $400, $500, $600 a month. And when somebody has more expenses than they do income, that makes a significant difference, right? And so there are times where I might suggest, like, hey, I know you don't really want to do this, but this could make a really big difference for you. And is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. Is it going to relieve some of the stress that you're feeling every month? Yes, right? Because we're changing your cash flow. While we're always looking at ways to, increase income, right? And you guys have heard me talk about it, but I always say there are 4 ways to that you can go about, really changing your financial situation each month. Decrease expenses, increase income, do both or do neither, right? You've got 4 choices there. And so I like to do both, right? Like I like choice number 3, please, let's do both. Let's decrease our expenses and increase our income. But a way that you can do some of that sometimes is selling some assets. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but sometimes it's almost necessary to get you so you're not having late payments, right? You're not having bank maintenance fees hit you. You're not putting all your groceries on a credit card and compounding the issue, right? Like there are some things that if we can sell an asset to knock out some of those debts and to change some of the cash flow, boy, does it really help you in the short term too.
Yeah. And I wanted to highlight as a contrast to my client situation, my own situation, a couple of times where I've thought, ooh, maybe I'll sell my home to pay off my debt. And it just would not have been advantageous. So there have been a number of different times where I've looked at the remaining amount of debt that we have. And for my wife and I, that's student loans. And as the market kind of increased beyond 2012, because 2012 was the bottom. So by like 2014, there was some equity. And by 2016, there was even more equity. And by 2018, it was like, wow, like look at all this equity. And so each of those times, it's like I crunch the numbers and I'm like, well, if we sold the house, obviously we'd have to pay off that loan, but then there's enough equity and so we could hit the reset button. The problem is I bought my house for $119,000 and I have a $750 mortgage payment. Where in the United States of America am I going to live for $750 a month? I'm not. And so while I've been tempted in the past to want to hit the reset button myself, I bought such an inexpensive home that if I sold and took the equity out and then I hit the reset button and then I had to try to buy back in, it's absolute ludicrous. Like back then in 2018, when I was crunching the numbers, it would be buying back into the market like at about $250,000 or $300,000. Well, we don't have that much in student loans. Like our mortgage and our student loans don't equal that. So that's just silliness and absurdity. Here we are a mere 5 years later, and I could sell my house for $400,000 or more. And I love my home. This is not a $400,000 home. It just isn't. And so, I just wanted to kind of illustrate as a contrast, like sometimes hitting the reset button makes sense. Maybe you overbought, you're in over your head, you did it too soon. But when you got a pretty rock solid situation going on, don't blow that up just because you're trying to get out of debt faster. So I've taken the longer approach to getting out of the student loans. Because I refuse to take out equity to pay them off. All that is a shell game. Like you just transfer debt from one debt instrument to another debt instrument. Like you didn't get rid of debt.
Right.
And I won't sell. So not going to happen.
Right. And I think that that's a perfect example of when it might work and when it might not work, right? When it's really not advantageous. And that's where kind of running the numbers and looking at your long-term plan. Now, maybe if you guys were looking at leaving the Phoenix area, right, in a couple of years, right, maybe even though rent could have been more than what you were paying for a mortgage, knowing that you wanted to maybe move in a couple of years, maybe it would have been wise, right? Sell it, rent for a couple of years, take that equity, then we could be putting into our moving fund and our down payment for another home, and so it's really about looking at that long-term plan as well, right? And what do the next 5 years of my life, what am I hoping to do? Where am I hoping to be? Right. And I think it's nice, because I think sometimes people don't necessarily know like what are assets. And so we've talked about a couple, but let's just list a couple of assets that people might have that they could potentially sell. And I also want to put that there might be some that we say that we wouldn't necessarily advise selling, right? I think and as we're going down, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that, but we've already talked about the home. That is an asset that you could potentially sell. May or may not be a good idea, as you've just illustrated, that wouldn't have necessarily worked for you, but for your clients, right? It worked really well for them.
Yep.
Another asset, vehicles. So let's talk a little bit about this one, because this one can be kind of tricky, I think, with selling vehicles.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I mean, one of the first things we did was sell a car. And, I think when people hear car, they don't necessarily think asset. But the truth of the matter is, like, this microphone in front of me is an asset. This keyboard in front of me is an asset. The computer in front of me is an asset. Now, some of these assets are depreciating in value. And so they kind of turn themselves into liabilities. If I owe more on a car than what it's worth, then yes, technically on a balance sheet, that's a liability. But as I said, I sold my car and I owed $7,300. The dealership offered me $7,000 for it. So I had to write a check to get out of it, but that was still an asset, nevertheless. I mean, so it's still something that I owned, with a bank lien on it, of course. But, I think people lose sight of the fact that a vehicle is still an asset. It doesn't always mean you have equity in it, but it's still an asset. It's something you own that has value, even if that value is depreciating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, when we're looking at vehicles, I've had some tough conversations with some clients and saying, listen, the amount that you're paying per month on this vehicle is staggering, quite frankly. And I'm just going to be honest, the amount that people are paying for car payments per month these days, I think is absolutely staggering. And I won't go into that whole debate, but sometimes, even if you don't have a lot of equity in your vehicle, sometimes if you can sell it and as you had to, pay a little bit of money to get out of it and then still purchase another vehicle on a loan, you are still changing your financial situation, right? Because maybe you could go from a $750 a month payment down to a $300 a month payment. So that effectively changes your cash flow by $400 a month, right? Now, interest rates, we could get into all of that, but it's still important to look at the numbers. And it doesn't mean that you're getting rid of something just to eliminate the payment or to eliminate the debt completely. Maybe you can reduce it, right? That really changes your cash flow. And I think vehicles are one of those that can be done if you get creative and you really look at your numbers, right? And there are some really great used cars out there. Do not tell me that there aren't, because there are. There are. I'm looking at some to purchase as we speak, actually, right? And so, but I think they are still an asset. They still have value to them. Even if you owe money, even if you break even on it, right? You can eliminate that debt, eliminate that and then purchase something that is more affordable within your monthly budget, right? And so it's not always getting rid of it altogether, but maybe you can lessen the payment each month.
Yep. Another asset that comes to mind too is, and I have a client story for this one too, and that's investments. So started working with a client a number of years ago, and as we were exploring the overall financial landscape, realized that there was $17,000 in an investment account. And as we moved through some things and as we built up new money habits around things like debt and really trying to get rid of debt, an understanding that like once we get rid of this debt, we're not going to take on new debt, right? Like actually the first step to eliminating debt is don't take on any more new debt. But then you have to hold on to that as you get through the debt and you pay it off. You got to hold on to the no new debt. And so after a few months of really building up that discipline, the client was like, so I have this $17,000 sitting in this account and it's not really making any money. Like it's barely invested. I think most of it was like maybe in the cash account waiting to be invested. And he's like, I'd love to take this out and just knock off the rest of this credit card and just be done. And it's like, okay, well now we're in a position where you have the habits to do so, and you have this asset that if that's how you want to use it, of course. So yeah, that just made me think of another asset that can be used to change your financial situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good one. And one I will say that I see a lot of people do that frankly, I don't necessarily agree with, only on very, very specific terms, is taken out of their retirement accounts to pay off credit cards and such. Your retirement account is an asset. I think there are very, very few instances that I feel really good about people selling those or borrowing from, a lot of times it would be a loan. Don't give me that speech where you're just borrowing it from yourself and paying yourself back. No, it goes far deeper than that. So while that is an asset, I 99% of the time do not suggest that. I don't want you to see borrowing and really, I call it stealing from your future to cover your past. I don't like that. So
I like that. I like that expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please don't do that. There are very specific and very few times where that can be a benefit, but there are a lot of different types of investments. Maybe some of those can be like you with your client, right? Maybe that can be beneficial. But please don't just say, oh, I've got this, retirement account, or I've got this investment account. Let me sell it to pay off my credit cards. We need to run the numbers, right? And it really goes back to, what is your long-term plan? What are your habits? This is not I get an inheritance and it's going to take care of everything, because it never works that way, folks.
That's right.
So other assets are like collections or antiques that you might have, right? Sometimes we keep them around because we feel obligated, but maybe we don't actually want them anymore.
Yeah. I don't have any of those, so I wouldn't know anything about them. But no, right? Like as that's odd to me. So like I come from a rich Italian tradition of like heirlooms, and things are handed down from generation to generation, and they're supposed to be important and valuable. And sometimes I'm like, what is, sorry for all of our listeners who are probably like, did we just lose Nino? No, I'm doing this thing where I'm like looking at my hand and just staring off into space. Like, what is, so that's an odd one, collectibles, antiques, but certainly like if there is no sentimental value to something, and there's no real reason to keep it around. One of the things, like, and I'll liken this to even just doing garage sales in the house. My wife and I talk about purging, right? So a lot of times people in their finances, they splurge. Christina and I like to purge. What can we get rid of? So.
Well, and I think, I had a client that had some sports memorabilia, a sports memorabilia collection that was worth, I'll say, a significant amount of money, about $75,000.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
And so there wasn't necessarily an emotional connection to it. It was something years past that he enjoyed, he collected, he purchased things. They have grown in value. it wasn't something that he's like, he was kind of indifferent. Like, I could keep it or I could not, right? Well, if you've got some goals, right? Maybe you've got some debt. Maybe you're trying to, whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? That is an asset that if you really don't have, if you're kind of indifferent on it, this goes along, I think, kind of with the purging. Why keep something around that you're kind of indifferent on, right? And so let's use it in a way maybe that benefits us a little bit more. That's my feeling on it. Get rid of, for lack of a better word, clutter, right? Get rid of it. If it's not bringing you the joy that you want it to bring you anymore, let's sell that asset and let's use it then to benefit us down the road, right? In the long term.
Yeah. Yep. And it all circles back to what's important to you. That's where it all starts. Well, another great conversation in the books. I really enjoyed this one, as I do each and every one of them. And for our listeners, if you're ready to take your financial growth to the next level, schedule your free discovery call with Sarah or myself today. During your personalized session, we'll discuss your specific financial goals. Gain clarity on your challenges and explore how working with a financial coach can accelerate your progress. Don't miss out on this valuable opportunity. Book your free discovery call today and create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Well, like I said, Sarah, another great conversation, I think. Thank you for having it with me, and we'll continue our conversation next time.
Thank you for listening to the New Money Habits podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Keeping Up with the Joneses Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes. Join our growing group of like-minded people on Facebook and follow us on your favorite platform. Music provided by Summer School.